just because a lot of people are not aware of what a wildlife crime is or how to report it. Introduce a little bit of that at the start of the webinars just to make people aware, because we are members of PAW Ireland, which is a fantastic organisation and involves a lot of other organisations around the country as well. So we're all trying to do the same thing in raising awareness around wildlife crime in Ireland. So specifically today, we are going to talk about the hare, because the hare lives on bogland and in such open grassy areas as well. So we just thought it might be a good animal to do today, just in terms of our subject matter being the hare. The presentation now for you for wildlife crime. So just to go through it, I'm not going to go through all the legislation and stuff like that, because obviously that would go on for quite some time. But basically, what is a wildlife crime? So anyone who hunts, kills, injures, or possesses a protected wild animal other than under and in accordance with a licence will be guilty of an offence. So a licence can be obtained by a person, say, for example, who was rehabilitating a wild animal. They can apply for a licence to the National Parks and Wildlife Service for them to keep that animal in order to return it to the wild. So there are various licenses and derogations, exemptions, things like that, that you can apply for, but they are strictly overseen by the NPWS. So examples of a wildlife crime would be illegal hare coursing. You can see them listed here, hedge and tree cutting. And of course, we know the hedge and tree cutting ban is currently in place, and that runs from the 1st of March to the 31st of August. And that's because all of our birds are nesting and all of our animals are using our hedgerows now. So we cannot disturb them. So from the 1st of March to the 31st of August, that's illegal. Poison, both indirect and direct poisoning. Effluent in rivers would be an example of an indirect poisoning. Illegal trapping and shooting. Bat roost disturbance, incorrectly set snares, deliberate habitat destruction, and the introduction of non-native species. So they're just some examples of wildlife crime. And I suppose to talk about the hare in particular, the Irish mountain hare actually is quite an amazing animal for us to have, because it is a distinct subspecies of the mountain hare. So it's actually not found anywhere else in the world. So that makes it a really, really special animal. They are found all across the island of Ireland, including lowland and coastal areas. But unlike mountain hares in other parts of Europe, they don't actually go white. So a lot of our the European hares will go white in winter. Ours don't do that. Obviously, we don't have the weather for them to have to turn white to blend in with any snow or anything like that. So they have adapted really, really well to Irish conditions over the thousands of years they've been here, and that is really phenomenal. It's a truly native Irish animal, and like I say, found nowhere else in the world except in Ireland. So it's one of our oldest mammals, like a living relic, and I think that's why it is so important that we protect it and look out for it. And they are protected under legislation, and they are offered protection under the Wildlife Act, but unfortunately they are being hunted. Now they can be hunted with a license. There is a season for hunting between the 26th of September and the 28th of February. And again, that is regulated. So that's not something that you can do without a license. But unfortunately for our hares, they are being also hunted, and there is a lot of illegal hare bogland habitat. And the reason for that, the fact that we're talking about hares with bogs, is that bogs are very, very easy kind of open areas. So they're very visible. Hares are very visible. They're very remote. So people are not really, looking out for bogs as such. And because they're not in urban areas, they are quite remote. So the hares are kind of open to being hunted. And this is just a quick little pie chart to show you basically more or less where most of this is taking place. So you can see the blanket bogs have the largest percentage of 35.7, followed by the lowland areas, 28.6. Our agricultural areas are next, 21.4% and 14.3%. is where a lot of these illegal activities are taking place. And we do have some, I know there was aboard the Móna bog used repeatedly for illegal coursing. I think it's Clonline Glebe in County Offaly, and that's a cutaway bog, and that is known as an area for illegal coursing, and the guards and the NPWS are watching that. But there are other bogs as well. There's Little Brosna Callows in County Offaly, and that is a boggy grassland also used for illegal coursing. There's Lochbora Parklands in Offaly. There was actually coursing club members caught illegally netting hares on a bog restoration site. And the Mulla Peninsula as well in County Mayo, Blanket Bog again, also used for illegal coursing with dogs. So they're just some examples of some of the areas where it's happening. So I suppose in terms of that, it is quite difficult to know for sure what the statistics are and what the numbers are. And that's really down to underreporting. So kind of what we try to appeal for people to do is to report. So we really need people to report suspicious activities of any wildlife crime, not just hare coursing. Anything that you feel might be suspicious is always worth reporting. And we do know that there is an increase in wildlife crime because it is such a huge profit-making activity for criminals. And it says here, as you can see, it's second only after drugs, arms, and human trafficking. So it is a really, really worthwhile, in inverted commas, activity for criminals. So they will face charges that you see listed here. So we have, you can get illegal trespassing, hunting hares without the license, obviously, hunting with dogs without a license, aiding and abetting, and then you can get a driving disqualification. Now the NPWS does view this crime really, really seriously, and it does take it very, very seriously. As I said, these animals are particularly precious to Ireland, so we do take it very, very seriously. So what do you do if you come across or suspect a wildlife crime? So these are your three methods of reporting. The Paw reporting app is the one that we always try to drive people towards because it's extremely convenient. It just means you literally open the app and it's all there for you. You don't have to go looking up phone numbers for NPWS or guards or anything like that. Once you download the app, it's all there for you. So you just key in some information that it asks you to enter, and that goes into the database, and that itself will go directly to the NPWS. So there is a website, you can see it here. It's wildlifecrime.ie. That has a lot more in-depth information about the subject that I'm talking about and more. So this is, if you have your phone on you and you want to take down, scan this code, this is the QR code that you can scan to download the wildlife crime reporting app. So again, I come back to the fact that statistics are so important. And if people are downloading the app, then you've got statistics. You can find out where these hotspots are, what the numbers look like, what's being hunted more than other animals. You can concentrate on various species. And policies and reform are built on this kind of information. And we do get asked quite a lot, you know, what's the point of reporting? Nothing happens. There is no follow-up. The fines are rubbish. No one goes to jail. We got all of those kinds of comments. However, what we always come back to is the importance of reporting, because without the reports, there is no evidence. It's very, very difficult to gather evidence on a wildlife crime. But if people are putting the reports in to the app, the evidence is there, the report is there. And once the government bodies involved in the crime crackdown can see that people are noticing and are willing to report, I think that will really, really help towards getting better convictions and getting actual convictions and getting people sent to jail. So before we finish on this one, it's just to bring this to your attention. So what to do? So this is what you can do. Report, 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 report. I've said that already. But the National Biodiversity Data Centre, NBDC, you can actually record dead wildlife on that website. It's a little bit convoluted, I will admit, but it is a place that you can go to report a dead animal. You can report dead rabbits and hares in particular to the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. You can distribute wildlife crime flyers, and we ourselves at WRI have plenty. If you ever wanted any, please by all means contact us on inquiries@wri.ie. If you have anywhere you'd like to leave them, they're very informative and they're very helpful. You can also suggest local groups contact their National Parks and Wildlife Service for talks, because it's really, really good to get to know who your local ranger is, who is your local NPWS ranger. And then you have a point of contact in your locality if you happen to come across anything. And you can also approach your local Gardaí and find out who the dedicated wildlife liaison inspector is for your area, because believe it or not, there is meant to be one. So download the app, use that QR code that I shared with you there. You can download it. Like I say, it's extremely easy and it makes your life so much easier than trying to find all the phone numbers and so on. Okay, so that's just a tiny little bit on wildlife crime. Wildlifecrime.ie is where you need to go if you want any further information. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over now to the lovely Nuala, who is going to talk to you about peatland conservation and much more.
Thanks, Aoife. Great presentation, and I learned a lot there as well, so appreciate that. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone this evening, and I'm hoping everyone can see that there. As Josephine introduced me earlier on, my name is Nuala Madigan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer with a national charity in Ireland, the Irish Peatland Conservation Council. A special thanks to Wildlife Rehabilitation Ireland for inviting us along here this evening to the webinar and to share our story of peatlands with all the participants this evening. So the presentation will follow a little bit of an intro into IPCC, what we do, and an introduction into boglands and some of the kind of calls to action that we would like to see happen. And then I'm going to hand you over to Mark McCorry and Board Móna, who's going to share with you all of the great work that's actually happening on Irish bogs at this time through the rehabilitation and restoration. So who is the Irish Peatland Conservation Council? We're a national charity. This is our headquarters here at the Bog of Allen Nature Centre. We're based in County Kildare. We are open to the public, so you can visit us Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we also host a number of events during the year that are on at the weekend. So our next one is going to be a bat walk in June. And then we also have International Bogway, which is our big Bog Day, which is our big one in July. So do check out our events page. Our mission is to conserve a representative sample of Irish peatlands. We were founded in 1982, so we're on the go now for over 40 years. We currently own and manage 6 peatland reserves nationally. They're in 2 in Kildare. We own in partnership with the Moyne Fenuric Development Association, Fenner Bog in County Waterford. We own 8.5 hectares of Gurley Bog in County Meath. We own Cowd Bog, a blanket bog habit in Kerry, and our most recent acquisition was Ketzlock in County Clare. We are guided in our work by peatland conservation action plans. We've produced 7 since our foundation. We're currently working on Peatlands and Climate Change 2030, but that of course should be read in parallel with our Halting the Loss of Peatland Biodiversity, our 6th action plan, because of course we are in a wildlife biodiversity and climate emergency. The purpose of these action plans has always been to guide the work of the Irish Peatland Conservation Council, but also to inform and encourage decision makers and policy makers for the right kind of decisions for our peatlands, whether you're in local government or in national government. In summary, we protect and enhance peatland habitat, we advocate for the wise use and management of peatlands, and we promote understanding and awareness. We could not do this if it wasn't for our friends of the bog. We are a charity, so we could only do this and we only achieve this through our friends of the bog, through competitive grant awards, sale of goods in our nature shops, stamp donations, school visits, independent visitors, and one of the most important as well is our network of volunteers. And here are some of our volunteers out on one of our reserves, peat probing it to estimate the store of carbon on Lodge Bog there. So volunteers are extremely important to our work. So if you're interested, do get in touch. So why do IPCC give a voice for peatlands? Well, they are a rich and diverse habitat for biodiversity. I'll talk a bit more about that in a little while. They're really important for water regulation. Peatlands absorb rainwater, preventing flooding, and over time they slowly release it. This is mainly because of the bog forming moss, sphagnum moss. They're carbon stores, so peatlands contain 64% of Ireland's soil organic carbon. So they're said to be one of the best carbon stores in the world. And they're a source of food. So cranberries and bilberries grow on bogs. So while many of us probably don't think about going out to the bog today to collect berries, it was very much part of our traditional culture in the autumn time was to get bilberries and cranberries from bogs. Obviously, recreational opportunities are growing on our peatlands. A lot more peatlands are now accessible for people. There's more safer boardwalks. They are wetlands, so I would always say go with someone when you're going to a bog, but a lot more work has been done to open access to our peatlands. They're an inspiration to artists and poets. Seamus Heaney, the well-known poet, famously described our peatlands as Ireland's last wilderness, Ireland's unfenced country, not a wilderness. They're, of course, an economic resource. So as a nation, we've economically benefited from our peatlands through electricity generation. Originally, Ireland would have had about 8 peat burning power stations, obviously in the horticultural industry. So many people, one of the things I'll be asking many people this evening is to always choose peat free in your garden. And of course, many homes still are burning turf to heat their homes. But as I said, years ago, the turf was mainly the only food source people had for not only heating their homes, but for cooking their food and lighting their homes. And of course, they're a land bank for agriculture and forestry. This is one of our unique bogland plants, the roundleaf sundew there. It's an insect-eating plant, and only on bogs do you get insect-eating plants in Ireland. Of course, they're found around the world, but it's in Ireland. If you want to see an insect-eating plant, you have to head down to your local bog, and they're just out at this time of the year. And of course, dragonflies love bogs. They lay their eggs in water. The nymphs develop underwater. And what's fascinating about dragonflies, the adults only live for about 2 to 3 months. Their whole purpose is to mate and lay their eggs back in water. But the dragonfly, of all of the invertebrates in the world, they're the only ones that we know of that can actually catch their prey in flight. So some really fascinating biodiversity down on bogs. I didn't know when I was preparing the presentation this evening how much the participants would know about bogs. So I've kept it really kind of concise. I'm not going into too much detail here. You can see on the map of Ireland, just a small map there on the right of your screen. This is kind of an outline, a rough outline of where you'll find all the maps in Ireland. And we've kind of 3 broad peatland types. We call them a fen, a raised bog, and a blanket bog. In the image there on the screen, you'll see those yellowy bogs there. They're the raised bogs, so really dominant in the Midlands of Ireland. You might know that as the Great Bog of Allen, stretches from North Kildare right across into East Galway. In the north, we have the Lower Bann Valley raised bogs, but it also doesn't mean that you're not going to get raised bogs, as you can see down in Clare and parts of Kerry as well. So there are raised bog. Blanket bogs, on the other hand, you'll see are the blacker coloured shaded areas on the map there. They're dominant down along the west coast of Ireland, the Slieve Blooms and the Midlands there. You also have the Wicklow Mountains, the Cumara Mountains down south. I won't name all the mountains of Ireland for you, but if we were to squash all these bogs together, 1/5 of our island, or 20%, is actually made up of bogland. And I suppose, being wetlands, 90% water and 10% dead plant material, that the answer to why is very obvious. Ireland gets a lot of rainfall. So the bogs have grown very well here, considering we're on the western edge of Europe. Plenty of rainfall coming into that western counties there, over 1,200 millimetres a year. Peat is ultimately the result of an accumulation of dead plants over thousands of years. With the high water table, there's little oxygen in it, so that prevents the agents of decay, fungi and bacteria from working. Healthy peatlands have a water table within about 20 centimetres, and the main peat-forming moss is sphagnum moss, and it grows 1 millimetre a year. So because of the slow growth of sphagnum, that's why peatlands are kind of classed as these non-renewable sources of energy. They won't grow back in our lifetime. It's not like a tree that we can plant in 20 years or 30 years, we could harvest that tree again. Peatlands are different in that they're such slow growing, growing a millimetre a year. So when you look at 1,000 metres, a 1 metre depth of peat, that actually represents 1,000 years worth of growth. So, in terms of formation, how do they form? It all dates back to 10,000 years ago after the last ice age. You have, with our raised bogs on top, you have these formation of shallow lakes in the Midlands of Ireland. Naturally, these infilled with typical plant material, floating water plants, submerged water plants, the emergent water plants. All of these multiplied, and it would take about 3,000 years, but they created the fens. Fens are about 7,000 years old. They're a lake filled in with dead plants, about 98% water, 2% dead plant material. Most fens continued onto their growth into raised bogs, but we do have some fens remaining in Ireland. And what's interesting, one of our actions has always been to get a national fen inventory underway. So thankfully, the National Parks and Wildlife Service started that last year, but it's hard to believe that in 2024, we're only really now looking at our fens. We did a fen inventory back in 2007. So it is something that we've campaigned for a long time. Fens that haven't grown into raised bogs, the reason for that is they have some flow or movement of water into them, which is maintaining the real alkaline conditions. The most famous of the fens, I suppose, would be Pollardstown Fen, and that's located actually just outside where Josephine is near from, in outside the Curragh in County Kildare. And it's a lake filled in with dead plants, but the fen, if we think of it, sits down here. The Curragh sits under here, and as it rains in the Curragh, that's a glacial deposit, and the water trickles down through the sand and gravel, and from a kind of a giant underwater aquifer, it kind of flows into Pollardstown Fen. So because of this constant movement of water, it's never actually been able to form into a raised bog. However, 7,000 years ago, if the fen did not have a constant flow of water, their growth continued into raised bogs. So 4,000 years ago, we had much of the island covered in trees. We only know this because of our bogs, because when we've been actually developing our bogs, we've actually found oak trees, pine trees, yew trees buried in our boglands. So another really interesting value of bogs is that archaeological side of them. The preservative power not only is really important for carbon storage, but also of learning about us as people. We found bog bodies, we found great Irish elks, bog butter, we found old trackways of how people travelled. And it's all because the bogs are so wet, it inhibits any decomposition going on underneath them. So they're really kind of a living history book of Irish history down through thousands of years. Of course, these trees, bogs, aren't woodlands. They're more open landscapes. So what we find is that these trees, we know, kind of fell. Some of them would have been chopped down, as we know, in our blanket bogs, but they ultimately kind of fell over due to our changing climate. This encouraged more light, more rainfall, encouraged the growth of a very special moss known as our sphagnum mosses. These sphagnum mosses, they grow upwards, holding a millimetre, holding over 10 times their own weight in water and growing a millimetre a year. And that's how we get our raised bogs, 8 to 12 metres deep, and really an accumulation of dead plants over thousands of years. As I said, concentrated in Ireland in the Midlands. Blanket bogs, on the other hand, are younger. They're only 4,000 years old. When obviously the end of the last ice age ended, most of the water on the upland areas rolled down into the Midlands of Ireland. So they were much drier areas. We do know this area was farmed. The Cage of Fields is a fantastic example of that. So again, boglands being this kind of treasure trove of our actually culture in the past. Ultimately, when the rain came 4,000 years ago, it started to leach minerals down through these uplands, creating an iron pan layer. That's the kind of red layer going across the screen on these slides. And what you have is that became impermeable to water. So naturally, over time, the land above that became waterlogged and in turn allowed the growth of sphagnum mosses. Because they're younger, they're shallower, they're maybe 4 to 5 meters deep, and beneath them you have this mineral soil layer. And that's why our upland boglands were often kind of seen as more advantageous for afforestation, because you could deep plough this mineral soil with this peaty soil, and you could grow the single stand forestry for harvesting in years to come. The thing with this is, though, that afforestation of peatlands completely changes the dynamic. That open wet landscape is completely changed, and in turn you have a complete loss of habitat and the biodiversity that called that habitat its home. So that's just an overview of kind of the formation of peatlands. And as I said, if you have any questions throughout the talk, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So what is the status of peatlands in Ireland? First off, I should say that Ireland, we only know about 10% of all of Ireland's biodiversity. That's across all of our habitats. So understanding the status of, of biodiversity in Ireland, it's not just a problem in peatlands, it's actually throughout all of our habitats. But 75% of our peatland habitat have been mined or drained, and less than 1% remains active. The status of raised bog habitat active is bad, degraded raised bog is bad, blanket bog active is bad, and transition mire is bad. These are coming out of our protected sites because every 6 years the Irish government have to report to the European Union under the Habitats Directive, and that's where that's coming from, the status. So that's not representative of all of the bogs in Ireland, it's just the ones that we actually have an obligation under the Habitats Directive to report on, that we know the status of these. So as you can imagine, if these are the protected sites, you can imagine what maybe the unprotected sites are like. I don't think we're going to see an improvement there. 26.6 or 8 of the bog forming mosses are on Ireland's red list. 44% or 26 of the peatland birds are on our red list. One of the iconic bogland birds, the curlew, we know we've did a lot of research in that in recent years, and we know that sadly there's been a 98% decline in populations since the 1980s. Lots of work going on. We have a follow-on now from the Curlew Conservation Programme with the Breeding Waders Programme, the EIP. So they're doing a lot of work now on the curlew and of course other waders, but the curlew is included in that project there. So it's really important we have these partnerships and initiatives for our peatland biodiversity. And 19.6 or just under 20% of all peatland plants are on the red list. So it is something that we really need to consider. Considering we're in a biodiversity emergency, the figures we have around peatlands are not too healthy. What's the importance of peatlands for biodiversity? We know 20% or 1/5 of our island is bogland. 15% of the original flora are peatlands. 59 species of Irish bird species occur on peatland, most as breeding species. 26% of Ireland's mammals are dependent on peatlands in some phase of their life cycle, and 65% of Ireland's butterflies, species found in Ireland, are on peatlands. And there's actually 2 species that rely on peatlands bogs for breeding. That's the large heath butterfly and the green hair streak butterfly. So again, they have a really important role to play in the biodiversity of Ireland. These are just some I picked out. There's over 600 different plants and animals on bogs. I couldn't go through them all with you this evening. On the top left is the large heath. It's an iconic bogland species, really under-recorded. This species, we're actually going to be holding a large heath habitat assessment on Gurley Bog next Tuesday. If anyone wants to help out and volunteer, you can come along. You can get in contact with us tomorrow at bogs@IPCC and we can give you the details. But we're doing a habitat assessment, and what we're looking for there is the food plant of this butterfly. It's the cross-leaved heath and the hare's tail cotton grass. They're the 2 food plants for it. So if we were to lose all the bogs, the large heath would be one of the losers. Emperor moth down in the bottom right-hand corner, beautiful, what appears like eyes on its wings. They're actually a false face in nature. You've got, if you were a predator hovering over the bog and you see those 2 big eyes staring out at you, you think the emperor moth was huge, when in reality it's very, very small. But what's striking about this is it's actually caterpillar. It's this luminous green and it feeds on heather plant. We mentioned the curlew there on the left. It's classic, iconic curled beak. The largest spider in Ireland, the raft spider, is found in our peatlands. Of course, the red grouse feeding on heather on our bogs. And we've already mentioned the hare as well. So again, 600 different plants and animals are found on bogs. That's just a snapshot. We also know that peatlands are really important for climate change. So I felt it was really important to kind of mention this because a lot of people might not really understand how peatlands are related and why they're called climate change champions. All plants photosynthesize. When we're in school, we learn about trees, and trees take in carbon dioxide and give us out oxygen. All plants do that. All plants grow by photosynthesis, and our bogland plants are no different. Matchstick lichens, sundews, bog asphodels, cotton grasses, and heathers are all out there all year. Well, not all year, some hibernate, but they are photosynthesizing. What's different on a bog, though, is the fact that a bog is wet, and these sphagnum mosses carpet the bog surface. And what they do every year is in winter, the bogland plants hibernate because it's going to get really wet. It's going to get, well, it's already wet. It's going to get really, really cold. So to protect against freezing, a lot of the bogland plants, not all of them, but a lot of them actually hibernate. And when they do, they leave their leaf litter on the bog surface. Now, of course, that leaf litter is filled with carbon. In a woodland, for example, when all the they say about 3 tons of leaves fall in a woodland floor in wintertime. What happens in the wintertime is fungi, earthworms, millipedes, centipedes, snails, they all come in and they feed on this dead plant material, this leaf litter on the woodland floor. And what they do is they make this nutrient-rich compost, and the trees can grow big and strong. And they're really recycling the nutrients constantly into the soil in the woodland floor. In a bog, that doesn't happen because the water table is so high, it inhibits those decomposers. No soil bacteria, no earthworms, and no snails on a bog. There's not even enough nutrients on a bog for snails to live on them and have a shell on them because they need calcium for their shells. So what happens when the leaf litter falls on the on the bog surface? The sphagnum mosses kind of move upwards, grow upwards, and they just swallow it into the bog. So what the peat is, it's just this accumulation over thousands of years of dead plant material. That's this massive carbon store that's never actually been decomposed, so it's never actually released its carbon back into the atmosphere. This is a picture here of Lodge Bog, our reserve. Like in the wintertime, you can see it's very brown and dull. That's the Hill of Allen in the background there. And then in the summertime, you look closer, look at the lush green and the colours on the bog. And that's simply to do with, this hibernation. And as they hibernate, this leaf litter is being swallowed into the bog. It's estimated that Peatland store 1,566 million tons of carbon in Ireland, and they're the largest terrestrial store of carbon in the world under the right conditions. And I know Mark is going to talk more about that in the coming presentation. So to kind of conclude today, from myself, is it too late to halt peatland biodiversity loss? And from the Irish Peatland Conservation Council, our answer is no, because we know so much more about peatlands today. So much research has gone into peatlands over the past 20 years compared to what was happening when we started out in the 1980s and early 1990s. We do need work to do. So some of the main ones would be, one, the designation of our natural heritage areas. There was a redesignation of those back in 2017, and it's hard to believe, but still 8 years later, our NHA peatland sites are not fully and properly legally designated. Thanks to research, we know what we need to do through restoration and rehabilitation. We need to carry out complete inventories of our peatland biodiversity. We need to encourage landowners to engage in active protection of peatland biodiversity. And often this needs to be adequately funded through national schemes. We need to raise awareness and provide educational materials of the services peatlands offer and their importance. We need to integrate peatland policy in all national and local government departments. We're based in County Kildare, so we're working with a number of other local groups to look at the cutaway bogs in our area and the potential for this national peatland park. We see Kildare as the gateway to the Great Bog of Allen. And one of the things I mentioned about the services of peatlands was their economic uses. And one is horticulture. Thousands of tons of peat is being exported for horticulture and used in gardens around our country every year. Through this has a complete negative impact on the water table and biodiversity and carbon storage and flood regulation services peatlands provide. So one of the actions we do is we promote home composting, and we always encourage everyone to choose peat-free in your gardens. Peat-free products are more readily available today. I know composting might not be for everyone, but you can go to Aldi and Lidl today and buy peat-free products. That's very different from where we were 10 or 15 years ago. So we should all, as the amateur gardeners, be really considering to choose peat-free in our gardens. You can support our work by joining as a friend of the bog. You can do that through our online shop or contact us at the Bogavalla Nature Centre. And from me this evening, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity and the IPCC the opportunity to share with you some of our knowledge and our passion for peatlands. You can follow us on social media, and there's all our contact details if you would like to contact us following the presentation. From me this evening, again, express our thanks to Wildlife Rehabilitation Ireland for their kind invitation. And as I've said, we know a lot about peatlands today and what we can do for them. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to actually invite Mark McCorry from Board Móna, who's very involved now in the rehabilitation and restoration of our peatlands, to share their story and the work that's going on nationally for peatlands. Thank you.
Thanks, Nuala. Okay, is that looking okay now? Can somebody just confirm where I'm sharing the
Yeah.
slides the proper
Yeah,
way?
good, Mark. I can see it.
Okay, that's great. Look, thanks very much now for the invite, and sure, good to talk to you this evening. I work on Board Móna. I've been working there for 15 years in the ecology team. My main role is really around rehabilitation of the Board Móna peatlands, restoration, and all things biodiversity. So yeah, I'm going to have a whistle-stop tour of just some of the things that have been going on over the past few years. So again, like Nuala's put this in context for very well for me. If you think about Board Móna peatlands, these are the peatlands in the yellow, mostly in the Midlands. They were mostly, like obviously in the Midlands, mostly raised bogs. We have a little bit of peatland up in County Mayo. And of course, these were used for electricity generation, energy in terms of fuel and turf, and growing media for horticulture. So, like, where did we start? It was very much the Irish Turf Development Board. And just before the Second World War and during the Second World War, like there was a major focus on obviously the lack of fuel and out of that, Board Móna was established. Very much established to utilize our peatlands for fuel, but also at the time, it was felt, oh, we'll get rid of all this awful peat and then we'll have lots of land for agriculture and for forestry. Obviously, as time went on, all that changed. But like over the years, Board Móna had a huge impact on the Midlands. Back in the 1960s and 70s, sure, we were, building houses. To house a lot of the workers. Like imagine if we could do that now. And again, if you think back about when it was mostly manual labor, like fairly tough conditions out on those bogs in those years for those men, and sure it was nearly all men working out on the bogs. But look, we've obviously stopped peat extraction now. We've stopped in 2021, and now my focus now is on peatland rehabilitation and on what comes next for Board Móna. So in terms of how cutaway is formed, Nuala described how a raised bog is formed, and sure, Board Móna were almost reversing that, and like we would always say, a typical raised bog would have a 50-year production time frame, and nearly each year, like on average, we were taking about 20 centimeters of peat away. But all bogs are can be quite different. as we lowered the bog in terms of peat harvesting, like for some of those bogs along the Shannon and the River Suck, we continued lowering them below the gravity drainage line, and they required pumping. And sure, obviously when we now we've stopped peat extraction, we can turn off pumps, and those bogs are very easy to re-wet. So, but for a lot of our bogs, not all the peat has been extracted. So, we have a very heterogeneous environment here. And that means for rehabilitation, we have different starting conditions and different rehabilitation approaches for different outcomes. So this would be the starting point, and this would be, this would be what you would go to see a Clara Bog, for example, on a sunny day. And this is raised bog. And like, unfortunately for like the majority of Bord na Móna cutaway, this can't be restored. And that's because the majority of the peat has been removed, and the environmental conditions have, changed so radically. I'm sure, like, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But why should we rehabilitate peatlands? And again, like, I, use this term rehabilitation, versus restoration. And like, for me as an ecologist, restoration would mean, restoration back to raised bog, whereas rehabilitation really means environmental stabilization and the best outcomes. So while we mightn't get raised bog, we'll get a suite of all, a wide range of lovely habitats. But like Nuala talked about biodiversity, like, I'm going to focus on carbon here. And like, peatlands are fantastic carbon stores. So you can see the majority, like a large part of soil carbon, is locked up in peatlands, but peatlands only cover, 3 to 6% of the land surface. And you can see, if you look at the graph, this is an old graph now, but like, comparing the carbon, the volume of carbon in a rainforest, versus an average peatland, that graph on the right, you can really see that contrast there. So, like, again, like, if we think about, climate action, like, in the short term, the best, trees and woodland can have a really big impact in terms of absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. But in the longer term, peatlands are going to win in relation to, because there's such a carbon store, in terms of how Nuala described how they accumulate carbon. And so if we have our peatlands in good condition, they retain that carbon store and function. And that's why it's so important to rehabilitate them and re-wet them. So again, we can look at it, and we can look at some of the science. This graph really shows carbon fluxes and carbon emissions relative to water levels. And you can see there's this kind of Goldilocks zone, just around zero, which is, water levels at the peat surface. And we can get the water level there. Like, we know we're in that sweet spot in terms of minimizing carbon loss and switching that peatland, towards a carbon sink. And again, it's all about trying to get that sphagnum moss growing again and accumulating carbon. So for the past few years, I've been working as part of the Peatland Climate Action Scheme, and this is a really significant restoration and rehabilitation scheme for peatlands, really in a European context. And we've been, we're targeting 82 bogs. We want to carry out rehabilitation of 33,000 hectares. And really, like, if you compare the two pictures, we really want to go from obviously a typical Bord na Móna bog after peat extraction, mostly bare peat, to re-wetted and rehabilitated bog. And like, this is obviously really significant for Bord na Móna and Bord na Móna staff, and like, a lot of the workers that would have been harvesting peat have now retrained, to carry out the rehabilitation and restoration actions in terms of blocking drains and so on. So what do we want? Well, like again, this is the ecologist in me, being fussy about different plants, and like on the left-hand side, we see trees and we see heather, but that's an indication that that peatland is a bit dry, and it's probably like a source of carbon. In reality, we really want to see sphagnum moss, and you can see that on the right-hand side. And this is a carpet of sphagnum moss that developed in Timor North, and it developed naturally, like over a period of probably 30 to 40 years in an area where drainage was impeded. On shallow peats, we're going to get different vegetation, different habitats. You still get lots of lovely bog cotton, but the sphagnum moss just doesn't thrive in this sort of environment. And again, that's because of the underlying environmental conditions, particularly the geohydrology and the groundwater. Because there's such an influence of groundwater here from the underlying subsoil, the groundwater is now quite alkaline, and sphagnum moss just doesn't thrive in that environment. But we do get lots of lovely other wetland mosses, growing in this sort of environment. So, like what we'll see is, a typical cutaway, like a cave mount, where you're going to see wet scrub, and you're going to see wetlands with reed beds and fen developing. So just to give you an idea of the different conditions across these bogs, this is Edra Bog, just on the shore of Loch Ree. You can see the area photograph. You can see the bare peat, the light tan color of the bare peat, and this would be deeper acidic peat. Then you can see the darker blacker peat, and that would be fen peat that has been exposed. And then the white is underlying subsoil, which has been exposed, and that's where like all the peat have been removed from that section. So we use LiDAR data to plan rehabilitation, and this outlines the topography across these bogs. So it's really good at showing us which way the water may flow. And here, like the blue area would be the highest point, and then heading to the orange area, which is the lowest point. So that really gives us a good idea of water flow. So obviously we have lots of data on peat depths, and again, peat depth can have a big influence on outcomes in terms of habitat outcomes. And we do a lot of hydrological monitoring. So this is, this type of model here shows us that those light blue areas are easy to re-wet if we block the drains. But obviously, we want to also try to re-wet as best we can those areas that are harder to re-wet. So how do we do this? With PCAS, Peatland Climate Action Scheme, we're implementing a lot of different measures. Like in the past, we would have depended solely really on blocking drains, but now we're building bunds, we're creating cells, and these are very much trying to hold water on higher ground for longer. And this is what it looks like. This is Castlegar. And again, like this bog would have been in peat extraction up to 2019, and we were starting to re-wet it in 2021. So like it's now re-wetted, but we still obviously want the vegetation to come, and we still depend on a large part on natural colonization, on the seeds blowing in and the vegetation establishing. And look, that can take time. This is Derry Brat Bog, and like these aerial photographs are fantastic because we can go back now and compare and contrast. And this is Derry Brat in 2000. The kind of the horizontal line that splits the bog, that would be an industrial railway that would have taken peat towards Sternlock Protect Factory. And you can see in 2000 that this bog was mostly bare peat. But by 2020, now it is mostly vegetated, and you can see that kind of dark black patch in the middle, and that's now a wetland. And again, this is a bog where we've been able to re-wet since around 2018, carrying out drain blocking, and you can actually see like towards the bottom of the picture where like we were able to really use the dozer to go across that bog and block drains right up to the southern boundary. So that's what that bog looks like now. This is looking south towards leaf blooms. And like again, you can see like this is obviously a picture in March, just after quite a wet winter, plenty of surface water, so really like this is really what we want in terms of our cutaway peatlands. But a key point of bog restoration is making sure we're not having any impact on adjacent land. And this is a really good example of that. You can see the farmland around the margins and no impact there. So like we still, we take we're quite conservative, and we don't block boundary drains, and we do a lot of hydrological analysis of where the water's flowing and making sure we're not going to be blocking up drains that have unintended outcomes in terms of adjacent land. So I did mention, like the previous picture, like the vegetation there, that's all from natural colonization, over a period of around 20 years. So we do depend a lot on natural colonization, but what we're also doing now is we're starting to inoculate some of our bogs of sphagnum moss, and this is part of our Peatlands People Life project. And again, you can see some of the little sphagnum plugs that we're planting in the bare peat there on the right hand side. So again, this is just a range of pictures of just showing how the plugs, these sphagnum plugs can grow, and they can do really well if the conditions are good. And again, that the Goldilocks conditions here are water levels close to the peat surface most of the year, and just a little bit of shelter from vegetation. But you can really see that plug is taken off. So look, I did explain the difference between rehabilitation and restoration, and in fact that a lot of our cutaway isn't going to develop raised bog in the short term. But Bord na Móna did have several bogs that were drained but never developed, and obviously because we didn't extract the peat, they were just drained. They have fantastic potential for raised bog restoration. Because they retain the original vegetation and they still have plenty of sphagnum. So this program would have started in 2009 at Abbeyleix Bog, and it's been ongoing. And like we've restored now 27 bogs and bog remnants, and it's likely going to come to an end this year because we will have basically completed all of the restoration of Bord na Móna bogs that have the potential to be restored, that retain their original vegetation. This is just one example. This is Kelly's Grove. This is near Ballinasloe. You can see the former branch of the Grand Canal there on the left-hand side. And like this is just fantastic for me as an ecologist. Like you can see two excavators there, but there's a couple more in the distance. And this is what we're, the key thing about bog restoration. It's all really about blocking these drains to raise water levels close to the bog surface and get that bog wet again, so that we can kickstart the natural regeneration of the sphagnum mosses and other key peatland plants. So that's what that bog looks like the following year, and again, like fantastic results in relation to rewetting. So we do a lot of monitoring as part of the Peatland Climate Action Scheme, and look, we'll be monitoring water, hydrology, biodiversity, water levels, and carbon. And if we just take a look at this graph here, this is a typical water level graph that we would have from one of our piezometers. And you can see in the first part of that graph, there's quite a lot of fluctuation, and that's what you expect from a drained peatland, where it rains, the water levels rise, but the water flows away quite quickly. But once you block the drains, you see that flattening out, and that's stabilizing. So again, this is really what we're looking for, that kind of water level stabilizing like around the peat surface. And again, that would be a key measure of success. So in relation to biodiversity, like we have some fantastic biodiversity across our bogs. This is Uchter Bog, just near Bora. And like again, like I would have surveyed this bog, soon after I joined Board na Móna in 2009, and it was mostly bare peat, and you can see the fantastic vegetation, that is developed. You can see some of the recent indications of the rehabilitation as well, in terms of the pond, like they look like ponds, but those would be areas where we've taken peat to block drains, and like these wetlands are fantastic for like birds, like, and these are ground nesting waders, red shank and lapwing. And again, these are, as Nuala mentioned, some of the red listed species in Ireland. We have a wide range of biodiversity. The marsh artillery butterfly, like when I joined Board na Móna, we had one known site at Lollymore, close to where IPCC are located. And I think now we have over 30 sites. So again, like it's these cutaway sites, they're regenerating, rehabilitating, and making space for nature, but a lot of nature that's under pressure in the wider landscape. I put in this lovely picture of the bee orchid, but this is a pale variety, and again, like really unusual, but does pop up around the place in Ireland, so really pretty flower. And again, the cutaway can be fantastic for wildflowers because like particularly where you have shallow peat or subsoil exposed, because it's low in nutrients, and like it's not unlike the soil that these wildflowers would thrive in, say in eskers and like the grasslands, like semi-natural grasslands. This small plant called roundleaf wintergreen is a favourite of mine because up until recently it hadn't been recorded in Offaly. And sure, then we found it in Mount Lucas Bog and Wind Farm. And that was 10 years ago. And now we're finding it, look over right across our cutaways in East Offaly, and now it's spread to West Offaly as well. So again, just like another indicator of how these, formerly these landscapes that were used for peat extraction, used for energy and electricity generation, are now making space for nature. When you mentioned to her earlier, I had to go and find this picture, and this is really interesting. This is actually Clonlyon Glebe Bog, and I would have surveyed out here. This is 2012, and if you remember 2012, we had a really cold winter. There was about 3 weeks of snow. And here, like that's a her, it's quite blurry, but it was a her that was mostly white. So like it is amazing, like it's absolutely like a subspecies of the European her, but they seem to still retain this ability to go white when they need to. But obviously, I took this picture after the snow melted, and sure, it was as clear as day. It hadn't switched back to its brown fur again. You may have heard about the common crane, and again, we've been very lucky to see the common crane coming back to one of our re-wetted bogs. This is a bird species, that's has been extinct as a breeding bird for 400 years in Ireland, and sure, now we have a breeding pair coming back for 5 or 6 years now, and starting to producing fledged chicks. So again, really, really exciting in relation to biodiversity. Nuala mentioned Blanket Bog, and look, this is a picture of Blanket Bog out at Ballycroy. And again, this is actually a private bog restoration project that we have delivered. This was a large area that had been used for industrial peat extraction. It was not a Board na Móna site, but we've just completed that earlier in the year. And again, Nuala touched on the fact that Seamus Heaney mentioned this was one of the last wildernesses, and you can really get a sense of that, from the scale of the peatland here. And as part of that work, we were working with local contractors, and we carried out information day to show them how we were carrying out the bog restoration, and hopefully some of those local contractors and local turf cutters will now be able to start restoring bogs themselves. Obviously, this very much depends on MPWS and the availability of finance to do this on sites. But we have been working closely with MPWS and particularly on some of the protected sites, SACs and NHS. This is a particularly nice photo at All Saints. You can see the curlew, and again, this is actually art at landscape scale. Like if you can see the diggers just below the head of the curlew there, just to get a sense of the scale of this. And this is bunding, and again, the bunding is in place to try to manage the water levels and re-wet this area of peatland at All Saints that was used for industrial peat extraction in the past. So this is what like a lot of our cutaways are going to look like, in the future as this re-wetting takes effect. This is the drying of wetland, and again we have a lot of lovely wetland habitat rebeds developing, and then in the drier areas we're going to have a lot of birch woodland and other habitats developing. But the future for Bord na Móna is also going to be a future of renewable energy, and like this is a picture of Mount Lucas wind farm, and again, like we are planning to develop more renewable energy across some of these sites in the future, and again. Like here, like while we have the renewable energy, we can integrate other land uses here. Like building out the renewable energy allows us to develop amenity across these sites in terms of walking trails and so on. And there is still plenty of space for biodiversity across these sites in between the renewable energy infrastructure. So just to finish, for me, absolutely rehabilitating peatlands makes sense. It does take time. You may look at your peatlands from year to year, they're not changing, but they definitely are changing from 5 to 10 to 20 years. There's multiple benefits of doing this in relation to carbon storage and biodiversity, water attenuation, and obviously just like an improved environmentally stable landscape. So I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you. And Nuala, thank you. That was unbelievably informative. I have a few questions here, and I'm going to just shoot them out really quickly because it's 20 to 9. One of the questions is around, Nuala, people were very interested in your peat-free compost and the fact that it is so detrimental and yet it's still being sold openly across the country. So I think people were looking for a status on that. Is there any focus or energy being put in to have it banned?
Yeah, so in 2020, we were involved in the peat use and horticulture working group, and as part of that, the chairman set out a timeline. So at the end of Q4, which was the end of 2024, he had proposed in that basically for the amateur gardener, so that's the likes of me and you who are going to plant our dahlias and our bulbs in our garden, or to do a bit of growing it ourselves, we shouldn't have access to peat anymore in our gardens. So we campaigned then the minister last year. Probably a bit of a bad idea because he was going out of government, but it's something still on our agenda. And as I said, we're still giving composting talks and we're promoting it through all the time about the fact that we feel, especially, we understand that industry is still using it, and we understand that there is a need for transition there, for across the industry. But for the amateur gardener initially, we don't believe that any of us should have access to peat-based products for ourselves in our semi-detached houses, in our gardens, to be using peat. It should be all a peat-free product. And as I said, from the chairman's report from the working group, he had set that timeline for the end of 2024. Unfortunately, we didn't agree with the minister's response and the department's response at that because they didn't actually follow the chairman's report. They talked more about supporting the industry, which we couldn't agree with, in that they weren't actually looking at initially ourselves as the amateur gardeners and then really working towards the focus on the industry as well. So it's an ongoing campaign issue for the IPCC.
Okay, thank you for that. And very direct question here. Have either of you come across hair coursing when you're out and about on the bogs working?
Yes. Look, unfortunately, I would have come across it, come across a group of men, dogs and guns, and like it is, like what you do, looking at that situation, like I think for anybody, they should really walk away, and that's what I would tell my team to do. Obviously then reported to MBWS. We had, I think it was last year, or the year before now, we had a period like in County Offaly of, MBWS can be, quite progressive here, and they were watching one of our bogs. They knew there was people out looking to trap hares for coursing, and they were kind of waiting in the quads, trying to get out to catch them. So yeah, unfortunately, it still occurs. Like we would have also issues with illegal shooting and hunting. Okay, shooting of ducks with say a shotgun is one thing, but taking a rifle out and shooting swans or deer is another thing. And again, like unfortunately, this is still an issue.
Yeah, well, I suppose we reiterate again, report, because even getting stats on that type of thing is so difficult in this country, and stats make their way into law eventually, Leading on from that, do you ever find people are still trying to cut turf on the bogs that have been regenerated?
Yes, and again, another challenging issue. For Bord na Móna, like a lot of the bogs at Bord na Móna initially, started peat extraction. People still had turbary rights, so for a portion of these people, they absolutely have the legal rights to continue to cut turf. But there would also be trespass and peat cutting trespass, and that's something that we're trying to get a handle on. Like we would feel it's definitely reducing since we stopped peat cutting, but still it hasn't gone away, and it can pop up again. And like unfortunately, like Nuala was talking about, horticultural peat. Obviously Bord na Móna stopped producing peats in 2021, and like a lot of the peat stocks have now been used, and but that's almost left the market, and it's meant there's a smaller private peat extraction operations have now started or are ongoing, and that's now a challenge for the EPA and the county council to try to manage and to regulate, because it would be very much a grey area in relation to regulation. So But it comes back to absolutely agree with Nuala, peat free, like okay, to even take, we can take our domestic market and what we buy in our garden centres, but think about, county councils and even if we go to our garden centres and if we're buying plants, generally they're going to be in a peat substrate still in Ireland. So I agree it has to be a transition, but look, I think one thing that we can do is we can go and ask in our garden centre. So look, we like your plants, but we'd love your plants to be in peat-free compost.
And not even a transition, Marcus, just basic education. I mean, I'd say a lot of people don't even know that this is something that needs to be stopped or curtailed or transitioned out. Because you grow up in Ireland and you're just used to seeing peat products in your garden centres and not questioning it. So it's an education thing, isn't it? I'm conscious of the time. I have so many questions myself.
Josephine, can I say one thing there, just if you don't mind? Just on what Mark was mentioning there about the, Board na Móna having a problem with people trying, obviously the turbery, they have a legal right, but people going in maybe and trying to cut turf. That's an issue across Ireland. We would get calls from members of the public where they own a bit of bog, and all of a sudden someone else is going in on cutting on their bog. We know it as peat piracy, and if anyone notices that, we would say contact the local authority and report that issue. It is something that's not just on a Board na Móna site. Into other individuals who are private and have their own turbery rights might not have cut their bog in a while, but all of a sudden there's someone in there cutting turf. They don't know who it is. So it is a reportable incident to the local authority. And you're right, IPCC have been campaigning for many years for peat-free products, and it's something that is ongoing, and education and awareness is very important to that.
Okay. And then just quickly around invasive plants in particular. I was out in Gurley Bog a few months ago, and I'm not an ecologist, so I just with my eyes was looking around. Sometimes there's an awful lot of laurel here. There was a lot of laurel in the perimeter around the bog. So is that something you're doing as well? Is it constantly trying to remove all those invasive plants?
Yes, so on Gurley Bog, it's for IPCC. We obviously don't want to see any invasive species on our peatlands, so management of the peatlands from that is very important. Gurley Bog is a site that has multiple owners. It's not like one owner has it. There's private individuals, there's National Parks and Wildlife, there's NGOs, there's Quailcha own land up there, but it is something that we'd highlight to the, to the Quailcha areas where you have that. And again, a lot of this is introduced maybe from people going out and leaving their clippings out on the bog years ago. Bogs were often seen as these areas, they were considered nearly wastelands. They weren't considered. It was like you went there, got your turf, that was it. So we kind of saw them as dumping grounds. So a lot of work has gone on nationally to highlight and to remove illegal dumps from peatlands around Ireland. And these invasive plants are often just a kind of an add-on to that now, where they've established in these areas. So peatlands, yes, it is, invasive species are a challenge, but not just on peatlands, across Ireland as well, and other habitats.
Okay. But you know what? I think we're going to have to do something on bogs next year, because there's a whole conversation around bog tourism, and allowing us in to enjoy the bogs, but not destroy them as we're doing that, So yeah, we'll have to stop because we're here forever. So all I can say is thank you so much. I got an awful lot out of that. And I was saying earlier on, Mark, that I'm from Kildare, so I grew up on the Bog of Allen, but I never really understood how valuable it was until we started losing them, and unfortunately sometimes that's the way it is. So thank you. And this will be recorded and it will pop up on our website. And thank you all for joining. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all the questions, but yeah, we've gone over time. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you very much.